Introduce our topic.
Oops, start again.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Contemporary Issues Forum for Sunday, November 7th. We will introduce our topic with our guest speaker in a moment, but first we wanted to announce that 2 weeks from today, we will have our second of the month Contemporary Issues Forum, and we're still working out the details, but you'll see it announced in this Thursday's e-weekly, and then on the website thereafter, and it'll be another very contemporary topic of interest for us. So now the background of our speaker today, Leonard King, who is both a colleague at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute with Kim and I, as well as a good personal friend. We've taken some of his very interesting courses, and Leonard has come from a long academic background here in the Washington, D.C. area. He started teaching history and aesthetics of film at the Maret School in 1973. He's taught courses there on film, history, psychology, nonviolence. He's also served as a director of college counseling. And after he retired there in 2006, Leonard began teaching at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at American University. And he often draws a large crowd of people. And this particular theme today, and Leonard will go into a little more detail, he's got a fascinating course on the history of film. And within these great titles, Network, was one of the more popular ones that he's chosen, especially in the relevance of this film that many of us probably have seen, at least originally in the cinema, has a direct link to where we are in this complex world today with social media and the influence of corporations and big power. So with that, Leonard, we'd like to introduce you, and we thank you very much for participating with us. Approximately Leonard's presentation will be a total about 20 minutes, two 20-minute sections for about 40 minutes, but we're going to break about into about 20, 25 minutes into it for questions and answers. So what I'm going to recommend is, as you're watching his presentation, if you could either take notes on a notepad to speak later in questions, or ideally put them in the chat, and then afterwards when we go full screen, you can ask Leonard directly. So I will stop my screen share and pass it over to Leonard, and then he can go on screen share with his PowerPoint. Okay, Leonard, would you like to screen share now? There we go.
I got it. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for both kind words and for inviting me here to speak with you. I appreciate that. I'm breaking down the discussion. I'm going to show you some film clips also, especially if you have not seen the film. I will also give you a quick synopsis of the film. And I want you to think about how what was presented in 1976 is relevant today. And I will be listing a number of topics for us to discuss. We will break after a discussion of media and have a discussion of that. And then the second part of it is on international corporations and the corporate control of media. And then some trivia about the film. And then we will discuss the film in general and the specific topic of corporations and corporate control. So Network was made in 1976, and it was written by Patty Chayefsky, a brilliant satiric writer, and directed by Sidney Lumet. And this is a quick summary for those of you who either haven't seen the film or don't remember it very well. Howard Beale, played by Peter Finch, who won an Academy Award, by the way, for his role, is the long-term anchor at Union Broadcasting System, or UBS, the UBS Evening News. And he learns from the news division president, Max Schumacher, played by William Holden, that he has only 2 more weeks on the air because his ratings are declining and he'll be fired. The following night, Beale announces on live TV that he will commit suicide on the next Tuesday's broadcast because he has nothing else in his life. UBS fires him after this incident, but Schumacher intervenes so that Beale has a dignified farewell. Beale promises he will apologize for his outburst, but once he's on the air, he launches back into a rant, claiming that life is bullshit. Beale's outburst causes the network rating to spike, and much to Schumacher's dismay, the upper echelons of UBS decide to exploit Beale's antics rather than pull him off the air. In one impassioned diatribe, Beale galvanizes the nation, persuading viewers to shout out the windows, "I am mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." When Schumacher decides to end the Howard's news show and him as the angry man format, Diane Christensen, played by Faye Dunaway, convinces her boss, Frank Hackett, played by Robert Duvall, to slot the news show under the entertainment division so she can develop it. The news division used to always be separate from the entertainment division. Now often they are in the same divisions. So news has become entertainment. Hackett agrees and bullies the UBS executives to consent and fires Schumacher at the same time. Soon afterwards, Beale is hosting a new program called The Howard Beale Show, top billed as the mad prophet of the airways. Ultimately, the show becomes the most highly rated program on television, and Beale finds new celebrity preaching his angry message in front of a live studio audience that on cue chants Beale's signature catchphrase en masse, "We are mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore." Diane adds new shows, including Sybil the Soothsayer and the Mao Zedong Hour, hosted by the Ecumenical Liberation Army, modeled after the Symbionese Liberation Army. Max and Diane start a May to December affair, but when it ends, Max tells Diane, "You are television incarnate, Diane. Indifferent to suffering, insensitive to joy, all of life is reduced to the common rubble of banality." When Beale discovers that the Communications Corporations of America, the CCA, the conglomerate that owns UBS, will be bought out by an even larger Saudi Arabian conglomerate, he launches an online tirade against the deal, encouraging viewers to send telegrams to the White House telling them, "I want the CCA deal stopped." This throws the top network brass into a state of panic because the company's debt load has made merger essential for survival. Hackett takes Beale to meet the CCA chairman, Arthur Jensen, played by Ned Beatty, who explicates his own corporate cosmology to the attentive Beale. Jensen persuades Beale to abandon the populist message and preach his new evangelicalism. The television audience finds his new sermons on the dehumanization of society depressing, and ratings begin to slide. Yet Jensen will not allow the UBS executive to fire Beale. Seeing it's two for the price of one value, solving the Beale problem plus sparking a boost in the season opening ratings, Christensen, Hackett, and other executives decide to hire the Ecumenical Liberation Army to assassinate Beale on air. The assassination succeeds, putting an end to the Howard Beale Show and kicking off the second season of the Mao Zedong Hour. The film ends with the narrator stating, "This is the story of Howard Beale, the first known instance of a man who was killed because he had lousy ratings." And so this satire, as satire often does, illuminates many of the issues that we are now facing. In addition, as Chayefsky's ideas circled, he undoubtedly received further influence from the 29-year-old Christine Chubak, a morning show anchor in Sarasota, Florida, who addressed her audience on July 15th, 1974, with the following words: "In keeping with Channel 40's policy of bringing you the latest in blood and guts and living color, you are going to see another first and attempted suicide. Chubbuck then pulled a .38 caliber pistol from her bag hidden beneath her desk and shot herself in the head on live television. You may also think about the local news as the murder hour. There's a slogan, if it bleeds, it leads. And so the more sensational news is, the more publicity that it gets. So some themes I would like us to discuss today and how they are relevant today includes television news, mass media, and social media, their relationships, their power, who controls and owns the media, how does the media shape how we see the world and ourselves, the television generations, turning reality into ratings, news into entertainment, and reality show television, the appeal to the sensational, populism, such as the chanting of a man is hell and we're not going to take it anymore, international business versus nationalism, ideologies, and individualism, which is the second part of the presentation, the effects of mass media on democracy. And again, think about how the film is relevant to issues today. So here we have Howard Beale in one of his rants. And I'm going to show you then the very famous speech he has right after this commercial.
AAA mobile battery service. New car batteries delivered and...
So here is that and the populist message that many of us have been getting. And the general discontent and hatred. This is again the speech written out. It became the bumper. It became a major part of the advertising. And MGM and United Artists promotional department put the line "I'm mad as hell. I'm not going to take it on them anymore" on bumper stickers that were distributed to people who saw the movie or wrote in and got them. Another one of his rants is about the death of individualism in democracy.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna...
So we could certainly also talk about the loss of individualism, the general anger that people have in terms of "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore." And again, this is Beale preaching, speaking, and then he then talks about TV as a giant propaganda machine. And the situation, of course, has gotten much worse in terms of social media, not just television, as well as the proliferation of different different types of media and different, the multiplication of news shows and television shows. So again, in terms of themes, I'm going to stop in just a minute. Think about the television news, the mass media, their relationship, their power, who controls the media, how does the media shape how we see the world and ourselves, turning reality into ratings, appeal to sensationalism. Chayefsky has remarked that television news is an industry built on hysteria and shows democracy at its ugliest, the effect of mass media on democracy, populism. And at the center of Chayefsky's frustration with television and the media that he helped shape, more often than not, television paid no attention to the happenings that were of great concern to Chayefsky. With the power to bring together its countless viewers over the world, television has instead become a shameful commercial mechanism that serves only to keep people apart and happily diverted. Its investors now had propagandistic and commercial interests that could not be bargained with or reshaped for the benefits of American culture only for the benefits of profit. Ratings shape programming, even the authenticity or political leanings of certain news divisions. Viewers now had their personal identity shaped by the sounds and pictures emanating from the idiot box, an invention that never tried to live up to its potential, but instead made everyone watch the same programming and in turn forced everyone to think in homogeneous terms. So I'm going to stop here and discuss this segment of the film and the issues that were brought up. And then later we will look simply at corporate control of the media and especially internationalism. So
Thank
I'll
you,
turn it over to
Leonard.
Kim to call on.
Thank you. And feel free to add other questions and comments in the chat. So firstly, do you feel Howard's deep frustration and his mad as hell line came from his own feeling of irrelevancy and generally angry at the world, or was he picking up a general malaise in the society?
I think it's both. And I think by the fact that he is being fired and was going to commit suicide certainly shows his anger and frustration, but everyone else opening their windows and yelling, and then how it becomes a catch line for his news show shows the general anger and frustration that people have. And I think we see this more and more in the politics of America now, where people are expressing anger, frustration, feel they've been left behind, feel they're not recognized as individuals. And that's another speech that I showed you, the loss of individualism. And I think people are feeling that and basically yelling that they don't like what's happening in the world, and therefore you get these populist movements throughout. And I would argue that Trump's presidency is based a great deal on these feelings.
Well, and that leads to a chat question, which is, do you think this general frustration is what led to the January 6th, riot?
Yeah, definitely. And again, I am also struck by the idea of culture wars as a basis for politics. What I see is, in case you didn't realize, I'm very much a Democrat, but what I see is the Republican Party has not had issues to run on. They run on culture war issues, but they don't have a program. And in fact, in the last presidential election, they refused to even have a platform presented. They never developed one. They never presented one. Look at the issues that were brought up in the Virginia election in terms of Glenn Youngkin. These were culture war issues. These were not, this is what we will do. This is not how we will further the state, but this is appealing to very angry parents who feel that they have no say in their educational policy, feel that being left out by the economics, where we have greater and greater division between the rich and poor, the wealth gap, and people are very angry about it, but is not getting expressed in terms of what to do about it.
Speaking of that, Leonard, somebody asked if you'd comment on the media's portrayal of the critical race theory in the Virginia elections. I don't know if you'd like to comment on that.
I'd be happy to. I think it's in my opinion, it is a appeal to race and racism. It's a term that masks it. But critical race theory was not being taught in any public school, in any high school. It's a theory that is presented, developed at Harvard, and is taught in law school. But it does deal with the systematic racism that is built into the American system. And I think it got people, again, scared of race, people afraid to look at the history of this country in any critical way. They want their egos massaged. They don't want anything being taught that would make their children feel bad about themselves. To me, the history of the United States is from its foundings, when the Native Americans, the natives, helped Christopher Columbus, who got lost, find his way. The country has been built on race and racism. 1619, the first slave ships, the genocide of the American Indian, the treatment of Latinx people in this country, Hispanics. So to me, that was the bugaboo. And you can also see people almost yelling at the last, both presidential elections, last two, and the Virginia elections, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yeah, that's a lot of relevance. Carl has a quick question, and then I know you have to move on to the next segment.
Okay.
Yeah, going back to the era when this film was conceived and produced and screened. Needless to say, much of the anger and frustration in America were against Vietnam War, the liberation that the 60s brought about, the old establishment way, and then certainly Nixon. But Kim and I saw the film last night, just to refresh it. And like many other films, you go back and you see more detail. They use CCA, which presumably was a pseudonym for the FCC. And then another interesting point, back then there were only three. And was three networks. And I presume UBS was a pseudonym for CBS because they clearly identified ABC and CBS. Back then, William Paley's CBS was publicly known to be the only of the three networks that was subsidizing their money-losing news industry. And in which case, then, can we really draw a conclusion that 60 Minutes then was considered kind of infotainment or that entertainment news, or was there some other CBS property that was?
Well, first of all, Carl, there was a news station that was being developed, which was, for me in New York, Channel 20, but it was the fourth station. Fox would be a fifth station now. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he specifically is referring to CBS. I think he's looking at the general trend of Chayefsky was looking at the general trend of what was happening to news and the news media becoming entertainment. Also, there are no references in the film to Vietnam, Nixon, or anything else. It's much more dealing with the general malaise and feeling of being left out of the political system, and television being used to entertain rather than to inform. So that there was this possibility of great education, and we see this with the internet today. The internet allowed us to be educated, to communicate with each other, to form connections, which we didn't have before, all over the globe, and it is not used for that purpose primarily at all.
Great, thank you, Leonard.
Okay.
I think maybe you should move on because of the time, and then please add your comments and questions into the chat, and we'll share them again at the next break. Thank you, Leonard.
Sure. So we are moving on, and this is Ned Beatty's speech about internationalism, which is the other point I wanted to bring up. And just to show you the speech and then quickly finish up so that we could have more time to discuss things.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna.
So what he is saying here is that it's really money that is controlling everything. It's this international flow of money, world corporations, not individualism, not nations. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideology. It's the world of business, and it's business that controls everything. And part of the rest of what he's talking about then is there's no America, no democracy, only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Human Carbide, and Exxon. Finally, Beale asks Jensen, why me? And Jensen responds, because you're on television, dummy. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime. And so, how is the film relevant today? So that's, again, another area that we could talk about. There's no separation between the news division and entertainment. To maintain ratings and sustain profitability, the news media has become more sensational, more informant-based, and more niche-centric. We certainly see that in types of like Fox News and MSNBC. Television is not the truth. Television, a goddamn amusement park. To take Shaefsky's argument to its final destination, he suggests that if America was in part founded on the notion that the press should act as the policer of the government, and if the policer has since been bought out in the interests of corporate profit margins, then America no longer functions as originally intended, and it then becomes, as Jensen notes, a business. So I'm going to stop there, and we could use the last 20 minutes to just talk about, again, not just direct questions to me, but state your own positions. I see Hamid is part of the group.
Yes, Hamid had
who's also in a class he's in another class that I'm in.
So Hamid, and just before, why don't you unmute, get ready to ask your question, but I just wanted to say, Leonard, thank you. We saw that clearly. Remember when CBS decided, its legal department decided not to broadcast the whole Brown and Williamson, cigarette, when Jeffrey Wigand came out with information, and the journalists on CBS were livid, wanted to air his interview, but the legal department wouldn't let them initially. And then finally the journalists won. We just saw this in Florida, yesterday, where these journalists wanted to testify in court, but the university president didn't let them. So we're still seeing these tensions between corporate interests and journalistic interests today, I'd say. So it's very, very timely.
Yeah, and even when you watch a regular TV program, the idea is to heighten your emotional response to whatever is happening. So it's usually a murder or some form of suspense. And then you get a commercial because your emotional adrenaline has been heightened and you're more susceptible to then buying something.
Well, and we saw this clearly with the Facebook information that's come out. What draws people is their anger. The more angry emojis people click on as opposed to like, the more likely they're going to be participating. And yet, rather than care about the concern of the participants, they're more concerned, obviously, about what drives ratings and dollars. But Hamid, let's go to your question.
Just before we get to Hamid. We might also think about the Murdochs controlling much of the media, including Fox News, and Bezos controlling the Washington Post, where he said he is hands off with news. But how much is that really true? So these international conglomerates that control the media now control a lot of the social media as well. So,
absolutely.
Hamid, my friend.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have watched this movie about 7 times, maybe 8. To me, it's very moving and very touching. It's very touching because I am old enough to remember when the world was divided into the colonial powers. There were no IBMs when I was young, but there was Great Britain and France and so forth. I also remember that the great wars were not between the DuPonts and AT&T, but it was between the Japan, who did not have a sphere of influence, and they wanted very much the sphere of influence for their own prosperity. Now, moving forward, you see, I have watched about 20 elections in this country, 15 elections in this country. And there is always a vision given, a party platform that if you give us the power, we will make the country this way. To me, it's very strange that the countries in like Denmark, like Sweden, like Finland or Norway, do not have the kind of discontent the citizens have that we have in the United States. Something is very much wrong over here. And the wrong is that the commercial model that we have towards the only pedagogical institution that we have, that's TV. What went wrong with the professors in Florida is that they do not have any other mechanisms of bringing their ideas to the public, only the Florida one. It is not like Martin Luther. If the Pope did not agree to his desires, he can publish his own books. So we have to undo the hubris that the commercial way of controlling or managing the television is the only model that is available. And that is doing us a great degree of wrong. It is dumbing down our nation. And we are going to the dumb people, the ordinary people, to tell us how the nation should be. The movers and shakers of society must give their ideas how the nation should be built intellectually, not only physically. Here ends my spiel.
Thank you. Certainly part of the movie is underlying what makes us happy, what makes us intelligent. Part of the Howard Beale speech that I presented was turn to religion, turn to yourself individually, turn to books, think for yourself, don't look for television. And instead, what we have is really the commercialization of happiness. So we think if we buy something, if we see something that excites us, that's going to make us happy and content and individuals, and it doesn't.
Leonard, actually, I want to ask you a question. While I do, I'd love to hear from others in the, anyone feel free to jump in. But I want to ask, here Howard is earning his livelihood in television. That's his career. And yet he's telling everybody to turn off the TV. Could you just speak a little bit about that dichotomy?
I think that's a great deal because I think you pointed to a very important conflict and contradiction, because we all are part of this system, this corporate system in some ways. I taught at a school where I emphasized critical thinking, but I was also aware that a large portion of the population was very affluent and were protecting their interests in some sense. In other words, I was tied in with the same corporate interests, the same money making, the same system that we're all in. And that conflict is very hard. Can you use, and one of the things that Chayefsky is asking is, can you use the media to get people to think? And we sometimes see that in documentaries. We see that in C-SPAN. Some of the news outlets certainly try to get us to think. But again, they're tied in with corporations. And as you pointed out with the CBS with tobacco, which is what got Diane Rather also fired. At some point, the corporate interests of the news media comes into conflict with the need to inform critically and get people to think. And so if you start questioning the very news media that you have or the corporate interests, remember, every news outlet is really only exists because they're sponsored in some ways through advertisements. They're paid. And so can you go against the advertisers? And that's what Howard Beale event first does. And then they use it. But it's a little like remember Virginia Slims when they first came out? They were saying these were the revolutionary cigarettes for women, right? Join the revolution. by buying a product, right? Their product. So again, it gets co-opted. And that's what Chayefsky is seeing.
Yes. Well, firstly, before Carl, anybody else that hasn't spoken that would like to ask a question? Aiden, Art, Phyllis, anybody? Loretta, do you have a question you'd like to pose or a comment to make? This is your chance here.
Sure, I'll just mention on that last comment that in social media, as in broadcast, you're seeing co-opting of social issues by commercial entities. The whole rainbow colored products and pink for breast cancer awareness, all those kinds of things are now commercialized.
But is anything ever really being done?
Well, they give pennies to the cause that they're championing.
Yeah.
Right. But the real cause is to increase their own popularity, right? If you can
Right.
sponsor a popular cause, you become more popular. But how much is it helping that cause?
Right.
Exactly.
Riding the bandwagon of looking good. Yes, indeed.
Sure.
Anyone else want to make a comment or ask a question? Well, we'll go to Carl and then see if anybody else would like to. Yes, Carl.
Yeah, on that last clip that you're showing with the chairman, what was his stage name there in the film? Anyway, he was a chairman of the board for the television network UBS, and he was referring to the reality that he was being pressured by shareholders. In this case, Saudi Arabia was a big investment, other things, which goes back to kind of the reality of that era in the 70s. Remember, in America, about in the theme, economic system is the natural order. In fact, that has prevailed in America and the West and still does. And the tension between the international business community that can be evil if it's over controlled, but yet there's a moderating factor if there's a lot of different investors around the globe. But governments and ideology in the 60s and 70s, we were looking to Eastern Europe and Japan, China and Russia as the ideological control of the government and their people. And they were looking to us as the freedom of the West. And, if the international monetary system with corporations does prevail and control resources like oil and other things, I would say, though, in a counterpoint, that in media investments, the editorial departments of the New York Times, the editorial of the Washington Post, the editorial of CBS and all the other, there is a firewall, if not rigid, at least prevailing, unlike other corporations. So there's something to be said about the media is still a little bit more ethically in ideology driven than other corporations.
Well, let's see if Leonard agrees. Leonard?
Well, first of all, Chayefsky would argue that your idea of freedom in the West is an illusion. And certainly Beale talks about the total loss of individualism, and there really isn't any freedom, and that we are controlled by what we watch, and we are controlled by the media. The second point about international business and investment, I think, is very important, because look at American attitude towards Saudi Arabia. If they didn't have oil, look how much, in some sense, almost the forgiveness of the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. If other countries that did not have oil were doing what Saudi Arabia would be doing, the United States' diplomatic stance would be totally different with them. And so there is an international, corporations are international, and they invest in all sorts of countries. That's what China is doing now, but certainly the United States has been doing what is often called economic imperialism for over a century, where their economic investment is controlling the politics and foreign policies of other countries. And that, I think, is what he's talking about, and that there really is no nationalism anymore. Nationalism individualism are illusions, all controlled by the movement of money. And that money is what is ruling the world. And that money is controlled by international corporations.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to ask, Joan, I see you've unmuted. Did you have a question?
I just had a comment, really,
Sure.
concerning like the evening news. It seems to me it's over half advertisement. Myself and a number of people I know, the ad comes on and you start doing something practical. You finish up the dishes, you go sew a button on that's come off, you do something practical while those ads are on. And then maybe you overshoot and miss some of the news because you're concentrating on something else. So, I mean, this overdue of the advertisements, I think, is completely killing the news shows. They are not being seen the way they were before. You're missing part of them because you're doing something else, because the commercials are so prominent and so many of them.
And also, as you're pointing out, the amount of time that's actual news is really minimal, especially in the evening news. And the other point I wanted to make, and I tried to make earlier, is there's a saying: if it bleeds, it leads. The more sensational, the more violent it is, the more it becomes the prominent news. Just the other day, the lead story was the stampede and the death of people in Texas in the concert that they had. It was not the passage of the infrastructure bill, which affects many, many more people, but is not as sexy. It's not as violent. It's not as emotionally engaging. And that's became the lead. So you look at how news is controlled, you look at what kind of news is presented and when, and I think you'll see that a lot of it has to do with violence and sensationalism, and even critical issues that should be presented aren't presented in a way that will get you deeply into it and to question.
Yeah, thank you, Leonard. Loretta, you'll have to unmute.
Okay, now, one thing I talk to my daughters about, they're 20-somethings, is how universal the media used to be when there were only 3-4 networks. And that's been lost now with the fragmentation of media, with the social media, how easy it is for people to get their views out. And, you know, I just got a new phone, and there's iNews, and there's this other kind of news. And the point being that when we only had a few networks, everybody watched the evening news, everyone, or if they didn't catch that, then they watched the 11 o'clock news. So we all knew what the news was. Now it's much harder to know what the news is.
There's also used to be what was called the fairness doctrine, where media had to present many sides of a position. Now with the fragmentation of news, a news, the One News Network, Fox, many people see MSNBC as all leaning just one way politically and not presenting many different points of view. So it reinforces what you believe in rather than get you to think about what you are assuming.
Right.
Bruce, looks like, are you ready to ask a question? Please.
Well, a couple of things that have occurred to me is one, we have a major outlier in the news business, Fox News, which has a decided political point of view, which attracts the various followers, and it's hard to figure out how this fits into it, because you have this one outlier that feeds the conservative broadcast, and I suppose it's entertainment, and I just have trouble figuring out how that fits in. How would Chayefsky react to Fox News?
Well, one of the things that Carl I know has often pointed out is the line between news and editorials are disappearing.
Mhm.
And certainly Fox News, almost inevitably, most of it is editorial and comments rather than anything else. And I think he would, I think Network anticipated where Fox News goes, that it is influencing exactly what you should do, what you should think, how you should react, and is based on a lot of visceral anger and emotion, and that it appeals to that feeling of being left out, that someone else is taking your place, especially if they're people of color, and that the government is not legitimate. You know, that Trump won the election, so this is not a legitimate government. No one should go along with it. And I think it's definitely it appeals to the populist sentiment throughout the country, which unfortunately to me is growing rather than diminishing after the last election.
Mm. And I'm wondering if you could comment, Leonard, on that point about how are some journalists being co-opted, mainstream journalists. I'll never forget Judith Lewis had a main front page article in the New York Times talking about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq as if it was a fact. And I remember reading that and thinking, wow, well, maybe there are. Because at the time, of course, I didn't believe it. But I think that swayed some people. And here she was reporting on it as if it was fact, but she was, I think, co-opted.
Judith Miller or Lewis?
Oh, I don't know. Anyway, whatever.
The whole idea of news being co-opted, it obviously is powerful. News is powerful. So there are subtle ways that it is done. One is if you want a news source in the government, you often have to go along with what is being said. If you want, especially during COVID, if you wanted a place in the news briefings, you had to, at least under Trump, if you were not supportive of Trump, you were not either let in or called upon. A subtle thing that happened during the Iraq and Afghanistan war is that news people would be embedded with troops so that their very lives depended on being protected. And therefore, the news media, it seemed to me, was much less critical of those wars than in Vietnam, where the news sources were independent. So there are many ways I think people are corrupted. If you want to stay, as Bruce was talking about, on Fox News, you need to toe a party line. And if you don't, you're not going to last on that news show, right? It's interesting in MSNBC, Nicole Wallace is an interesting case who used to be sort of the conservative voice on the View. She goes to MSNBC and is now quite liberal in the way she presents news. So it depends on, I think news services shape what their, what the reporters and critics are saying.
I'd like to add one comment in answer to Joan's comment. At least in the United States, we do have many solid sources of virtually commercial-free or little commercial through National Public Radio, National Public Television, and C-SPAN. And ironically, C-SPAN was created and financed by big corporations back in the era of cable television that is totally commercial. So we at least have many options.
Yeah. And although the support of public television and keeps getting attacked, by, again, usually the right. Why is the government spending money supporting public television?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, we've reached our time here, and I just really want to thank you, Leonard, for sharing all this and providing what was really a stimulating hour very much. So we appreciate your time and all that you do, Leonard, very much. Thank you very
And
much.
this will be
And I appreciate you inviting me.
This will be posted on YouTube for viewing for anyone else that may want to refer it to. And thank you again, Leonard, for spending on a busy Sunday for you to be with us here. Thank
My
you.
pleasure, and it's great seeing you again, Hamid.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.